There is a place where unfinished lives are stored, not forgotten, waiting.
In the Unwritten, a neon void library unfolds as an endless city of half-formed pages and suspended glyphs, drifting like digital ash in lunar blue haze. Curious walks alone along a hovering corridor of incomplete stories, her silhouette wired with faint holographic sigils that flicker around her like broken UI, eyes reflecting constellations of red error codes and iridescent possibilities. Around her, skyscrapers made of stacked manuscripts and glitching glass rise into a sky of black ink, where constellations redraw themselves in real time, erasing and rewriting their own shapes. Far below, data rain falls in vertical green streams, dissolving into fog before it ever hits ground that doesn't exist. Behind her hums an impossible machine, the Unwritten operator's console, a vast circular array of floating keyboards, projection rings, and crystalline interfaces that reassemble abandoned plot lines into shifting holograms, each frame a life that never happened. When she raises her hand, entire cities of narrative freeze mid-glitch, typography and memory shattering into pixel dust that orbits her like a crown of discarded futures. The air vibrates with a low subsonic choir, voices murmuring drafts that were never finished, while faint graffiti of phantom chapters crawls across the walls in ultraviolet ink. She stops at the edge of a yawning gap where the world simply cuts off in raw white noise, her reflection splitting into multiple possible selves in the hovering glass shards around her, each version reaching toward a different, unchosen path. As she steps forward into the static, the void blooms into a vast, dimly lit cathedral of code and paper, aisles of unread timelines stretching into infinity, her figure small but unwavering, the designated Unwritten operator walking into the blank space where reality hasn't decided yet, carrying the quiet electric weight of all the stories that might still wake. Curious stepped out of the spiral as it came undone around her, the hair's glitching outline fraying into a lattice of broken frames and frozen echoes. The world she left behind shattered into stillness, a single discarded image caught on the rim of perception. All motion narrowed to a seam of light beneath her feet, a pale, decreasing crescent traced along a horizon that was not a horizon at all, but the inside edge of a page never turned. The spiral sealed behind her without a sound. She stood on a causeway of unwritten sentences. They extended in all directions, fine as hair, bright as bone, each filament bearing faint impressions that recoiled when she tried to focus on them. Words that had never found a mouth, scenes that had been almost dreamed, lives that paused a breath before the first cry. They wavered under her weight, yet did not break. Where her bare soles touched, the filaments bruised into ink-dark impressions, before healing to blankness again. Around the causeway hung the Unwritten. There was no sky, but there was height, tier upon tier of suspended volumes that were not yet books, only the silhouettes of them, outlines made of sleep-thin dust. Some were the size of teeth, some the size of monasteries, all hovering in a silence so complete it was granular, like the hush just after an explosion, when the air is still deciding what shape the ruin should take. A crescent of failing light arced above, not sun, not moon, but an ulcer of faint radiance at the crown of the void. Its illumination was dwindling, drawing shadows long and hungry between the absent shelves. Each time it dimmed, the unwritten things shifted, as if quietly reshelving themselves to remain unseen. Curious tasted the air, dry, like paper that had never been printed, carrying the brittle fragrance of abandoned intentions. Sounds came late here. Her own breath reached her ears with a small delay, as though it had traveled through another version of her first. Her heartbeat felt out of sync with itself, overlapping rhythms moving a half-thought apart. She remembered the glitch hair spiraling down across the floor of her old room, its outline corrupting, its eyes full of static. She had followed without question, stepping through the unraveling coil, because the world beyond it had already begun to flicker, to stutter, to confess its own incompleteness. Curiosity had always been a hunger in her, not for answers, but for the shapes of the questions that no one had ever meant to ask. Now that hunger shivered, cautious. From far below, if below was a word that meant anything here, rise a mutter of pages turning that were not pages yet. A pre-echo, the crowd sound of unborn narratives shuffling their empty feet. She whispered her name, only half to see if it still belonged to her.
Curious.
Names fall fast here. Something noticed the disturbance. At the limit of her vision, where the motionless shelves of shadow books curved into an unseen vanishing point, a figure resolved out of negative space, not by appearing, but by subtracting the absence around it. It came forward without crossing the distance, closer with each blink, unchanged in scale, as if what approached was not its body, but its decision to be nearer. It wore the suggestion of robes, stitched from the margins of stories that had nearly been told. Its face was an omission, a place where something had been carefully erased. Only its hands were precise, long, thin, each finger ringed with bands of pale metal that bore no reflection, no inscription, only a faint indentation where some lost glyph might have once slept. Curious knew, without memory, without learning, that this was a keeper. Not of what existed, but of what never had.
You stepped out while you were still being written. You left the hare's loop before it closed. That is a kind of trespass.
I followed the only moving thing. Everything else had begun to stop.
Movement is not always continuation. Sometimes it is the struggle of a line that does not wish to be crossed out.
Truth distorts here. Curious felt the filaments underfoot pulse, a slow tightening like breath drawn and not released. The unwritten around her leaned closer. From some vast recess of the vault, a distant shudder traveled through the scaffold of unborn tomes, a reminder that elsewhere, battles had been planned but never fought. Kings had raised crowns they never wore. Assassins had taken aim and never found their mark. History dangling by erasures.
What is this place?
The archive of what could have begun, but did not. The unwarmed beds, the unopened letters, the words carried only halfway to the tongue. Every path abandoned before the first footprint. Every question never lifted to the air. Every self that refused to be finished.
Curious felt a phantom weight gather in her chest. She had often felt incomplete in her own world, a sentence trailing toward a conclusion no one around her could glimpse. Here that feeling swelled until it hollowed her ribs, like something was unhooking the threads that kept her continuous.
I did not refuse. I only stepped aside.
You stepped out of sequence. The story you were moving through had not yet chosen its ending. When you left, it cracked along the breach. The hair was a symptom. A glitch is only a wound made visible. They will close the wound, of course. Without you, The tale will heal along a different scar. Your world is already mending. The people you left behind will forget the exact contour of you. You will blur into an unnamed absence in their recollections, a misplaced tool, a room they remember without remembering why.
Will they be all right?
They will be as they are allowed to be. There are wars you did not live to fear, diseases you did not remain to survive, joys you did not stay to fracture. The unwritten is merciful only by accident.
Silence folded between them like an extra page. Curious looked around again. The shelves of non-books loomed like dark terraces of thought, cut short. Some of the volumes swelled and dimmed as if breathing. Others quivered, desperate for the touch that would solidify them into fate.
What happens to the things kept here? Do they stay like this forever?
Nothing stays, everything waits.
It gestured. The place responded. The book halted between Curious and the keeper. Its spine opened of its own accord, but there were no pages, only a hollow. The hollow was deep.
It is not a library in the way you would understand it. It is attention. Each of these husks is an unspent possibility, so fragile that awareness might collapse it into truth.
Curious felt the hollow pulling at her sight, at her sense of self. Somewhere inside that empty space, a version of her might have turned back from the hair, might have yet sat quietly on the bed until the glitch spiral sealed itself and the world went on, crooked but intact. Somewhere else she had never seen the hair at all, had blinked at precisely the wrong moment, and missed the invitation entirely.
If I look too long, will I fall in?
Not fall, right. Though what you would become in that fall might no longer resemble what stepped out of the spiral.
The dwindling crescent above them flickered, shedding a fine rain of silver dust that evaporated before it could touch anything. With every pulse of its weakening light, more of the archive slipped into a grey so dense it felt like weight upon her shoulders.
How do I leave?
Those who arrive here have broken their sentence. You are no longer carried by the current of your world. To return, you must choose a place in the unwritten and step into it. You must agree to be inscribed along a path that was once refused.
Curious's thoughts scattered and regrouped, like birds startled into flight. You mean, become one of these? A life that never happened?
A life that did not happen there. But it might happen here, in the margins, in the spaces no one thought to consider. You would be anchored again, bound to a line. You would no longer drift. In time, as your choice settles, one of these silhouettes will thicken into ink, and its absence in the old world will harden into certainty. What was almost will become never.
The hairs on her arms rose. It felt like being offered a body carved from negation.
And if I do not choose?
Then you remain untaken. You walk the scaffolds. You listen to the nearly voices. You wear away. There are those who haunt this archive as fading impressions, the not quite ghosts of decisions indefinitely postponed. They become librarians of their own avoidance, caretakers of doors they never pass through. Eventually, even they become unwritten. Their contours dissolve. The last possibility that clung to them shatters and is distributed among other waiting hollows. Nothing is lost. It is only recombined.
Emptiness compounds here. Curious remembered the room she had left, the bed unmade, the spiral burrowing into the air. She remembered all the times she had nearly spoken and had not. Words swallowed. Questions aborted mid-breath because they were too strange, too ravenous, too much. She had always suspected that unasked questions did not vanish. They clung somewhere, like cobwebs at the back of the mind. She had not imagined they had an address. She took a tentative step along the causeway of unwritten sentences. The filaments hummed beneath her, each contact with her soles raising a faint, sorrowful tremor. as if they resented being walked upon by something that was trying to decide whether to exist.
Can I see them? The ones who drift.
They listen, they murmur. Sometimes they press themselves against the skins of the near books to feel what it would be like to commit. They are tender with the things that never were, because they understand them.
Curious strained her ears. From the corridor came a choral hush of almost voices, a susurrus of incomplete sentences, of beginnings with no middle, middles with no end. The sound wove through her like smoke, picking out every time she had said later and meant never, every time she had chosen not to knock, not to run, not to look. She could stay. She could stretch herself thin, make a home in the pause, become a custodian of the unlived. The thought had a certain symmetry, but even here, in this vast museum of abstentions, her old hunger stirred.
Is there a path among these that is mine? Something I nearly chose but did not?
The keeper turned one of its ringed hands palm up. Across the invisible surface, faint diagrams bloomed, constellations of choice, branching like veins, then disappearing as quickly as they formed. It plucked at a point no larger than a mote. One of the many hovering husks shuddered, as if receiving a bell's toll, and descended. This one was scarcely larger than her two hands together, slim and pale, its cover the color of tired moons. As it drifted nearer, Curious saw that its surface bore her own shadow, younger and older at once, fractured into many thin lines that almost aligned, but not quite.
This is a seam of you that nearly formed. Once you were offered a chance to leave your home and did not. Had you gone, the line would have led here. Not this precise here, but a place like it, a liminal district where unfinished things congregate.
If I step into this, what happens to the one I was? The girl who followed the hare?
She will congeal into a closed question. You will become the answer someplace else. The world you left will bear only the outline of your departure. The cause will remain uncertain, written off as sickness, as wandering, as an error that cannot be debugged.
Cold spread from her hand up her arm, a fine frost of dread and wonder.
And if I do not enter?
Then this seam remains here, forever potential, never embodied. You remain here as well if you choose, composting slowly into the soil of unrealized stories. Or you drift until even choice no longer recognizes you.
The silver crescent above faltered visibly now, thinning to a sliver barely able to hold its own shape. Each failure of its light sent a ripple of shadow through the shelves. Some of the husks dimmed, others flared, as if on the verge of selection. Time is different here, yet it still runs out. Curious looked into the book. The mist folded, revealing for an instant a scene that caught her breath. A narrow bridge of glass over a darkness that was not water, but discarded faces. Versions of her and others, looking up without eyes. On the far side of the bridge, a door without walls waited, slightly ajar, breathing a wind that smelled of rain on stone and charred paper. Something in her recognized that door. She thought of the glitch hair and its spiraling exit wound, of how she had moved toward it, because to remain where she was felt like slow suffocation. She thought of the incomplete feeling that had followed her all her life, as if she were a character someone had half invented and then forgotten to finish. Perhaps this was mercy, a chance to claim an incompletion and make it deliberate.
You are choosing, be certain. In the unwritten, every decision is an origin.
Curious closed her eyes. Behind her lids, after-images danced, the now still room, the hair spitting numbers backwards through its teeth, the taste of almost words on her tongue. She stepped fully into the book. For an instant, there was no sensation at all, no weight, no direction, no self. She had the sense of being disassembled into clauses, each hope and fear and memory peeled apart and held up to some reversing light. She felt the shape of leaving sharpen inside her, becoming an instrument, a key. Then the archive slammed inward. She was pulled through the seam with a force that did not move her body so much as reassign it. The rows of hovering husks drew back, shrinking to lines, to dots, to a single pinprick in the distance. The keeper remained where it had always been, the suggestion of its hand lifted in a gesture that might have been farewell or annotation. Curious fell. There was no down, but there was descent. She dropped through layers of almost, of nearly, of about to be, each brushing against her like damp veils. Fragments of other unwritten lives slid past, whispering through her skin. A woman who almost confessed. A child who nearly ran. A captain who thought once of turning the ship aside. She wanted to reach for them, to anchor herself to their outlines, but they were already dissolving, reallocated to some other waiting hollow. Her own choice thickened around her like clotting ink. The mist from the book pressed tight, then parted. She emerged onto the glass bridge from her vision. Beneath its clear surface, the darkness churned with faces that were not yet faces, only negative masks waiting for features. They watched her without eyes, a gallery of potential selves, of strangers, of consequences. Each step she took etched a faint line in the glass, anchoring her to this new origin. Above, there was a sky at last. Not her old sky, but a high vault of fading stars, each one half erased, as if someone had begun to rub them out with a great grey thumb. At the edge of that firmament hung the same one crescent she had seen in the archive, now more fragile than ever, a delicate hook of light holding back an encroaching dark. Ahead, the door without walls waited, open now, spilling a breath of cool air that smelled of thresholds. Behind her, the bridge extended a few steps, then vanished into mist that led back, perhaps, to the unwritten archive, perhaps to other trackless in-betweens. The way she had come was no longer visible in any meaningful sense. There is rarely a path back. Curious stood very still. She thought of all the things that existed now only as outlines in some distant vault. Her old life had hardened into a question mark no one would ever straighten. Somewhere, a story had lost its heroine and healed wrong around the gap. Another story waited ahead, forged from an almost she had just transformed into a now. She placed her hand on the edge of the door. The surface felt like the underside of a waking moment, thin, trembling, braced against the unknown. On the other side, she could hear not voices, but the spaces between them. It was not silence, it was anticipation, stretched to a fine silver tension. Curious drew in a long breath that tasted of ash and rain and erasures. Then, with the quiet inevitability of ink meeting paper, she stepped through. The door closed behind her without a sound, but the pressure of its shutting went on, a soft concussion rolling outward through whatever lay on both sides of the threshold. The air ahead shivered, then steadied, as if the place had been holding itself half-finished, and now, sensing her entrance, committed to being. She stood in a corridor that was not a corridor, but an abrasion carved through overlapping rooms that had once belonged to other buildings, other stories. Floors did not align. Ceilings rose and fell in hesitant waves. Doorways opened into each other at wrong angles, so that when she glanced left, she saw a kitchen inside a hospital ward, and beyond that, through a long window, a stretch of forest, whose trees were built from scaffolding and stacked chairs. The light had no single source. It seeped from under baseboards, pooled in the hollows of disused stairwells, clung to peeling wallpaper like a memory that refused to admit it had ended. Nothing here felt new. Everything carried the fatigue of lives that had been walked halfway through and then abandoned in mid-step. Stillness holds its breath here. Curious's bare feet met not glass now, but a patchwork of surfaces, cracked tile, warped wood, a rectangle of carpet bearing the dark echo of furniture long moved away. With each step, faint after impressions rose to greet her. A child's laugh blotted out halfway through, a pot nearly set to boil, a phone ringing without anyone deciding to pick up. The almost events brushed against her skin like cobwebs, clung and fell away. She moved forward because there was no dimension in which retreat made sense. Behind her, when she half turned, the door without walls presented only its frame, freestanding in a sudden courtyard of empty chairs, arrayed as if for an audience that had never arrived. Beyond the frame, where she expected the glass bridge and the churning faces below, there was only a blank thickness, not darkness exactly, but the absence of any option. The word crawled outward along the walls, dragging a wake of half-formed echoes. Her own syllables came back wrong, syllabically correct but tonally crooked, carrying the flavor of languages never quite adopted, the accents of selves she had almost grown into, but never chosen. Each version of her voice seemed to peer at the others, gauging which one would settle. No answer rose in exchange. There is listening, though. She could feel it, the prickle along her arms, the way the peeled paint on the walls tightened, like skin goose-fleshing. The corridor had a tension, not focused, not kind, but aware, as if it had been empty for a long time and now, sensing a new density in its air, remembered its purpose. She walked. Rooms opened intermittently to either side, their thresholds squared and proper, even when what lay beyond made no architectural sense. In one, a train platform extended into a fog that smelled of old steam and suitcases worn at the handles. No tracks, only the painted warning line along the edge of the concrete, crisp and untouched by any foot. A departure board flickered overhead, its letters never quite resolving into destinations, holding at the moment before they chose to matter. In another, pews marched in orderly rows beneath a cracked fresco of painted eyes, each eyelid halted in the first millimeter of closing. Dust lay undisturbed along hymnals that bore no titles. The air tasted like swallowed prayers, sentences bitten off just shy of the plea. Elsewhere, a classroom, chalkboard blank, desks askew, a single open notebook on the front table. No writing on its pages, only the impression indented deep into the paper of a line never penned. When Curious hovered her hand above it, the skin of her palms stung, as though pressing against a wind, rushing violently the other way, toward the moment when the pen had almost moved. Each room seemed to hold, preserved and humming, the exact angle at which a choice could have tipped. She realized, as she passed them, that they bent subtly toward her. Not physically, the walls did not warp, but the feeling of them, the hum in the air, inclined. They knew she had come from the archive of these kinds of places. She carried in her bones the scent of the great vaulted hush, where unbegun things bided their untime. It marked her as kin and intruder both. At a junction where the corridor forked without distinction, left and right identical in threadbare carpeting and humming emptiness, Curious paused. The air between the two options felt different, though. To the right, a faint coolness, like the draft from a stairwell. To the left, warmth, the ghost of breathing recently vacated. She closed her eyes and tried to feel, as she had felt in the archive, for the thrum of unwritten lines around her. Here the threads ran closer to the surface. The unwritten was not an elsewhere now. It was the mortar binding this district together, the unwoven underlayer on which everything rested. When she extended her awareness, the hallways shivered. Lines of possibility brushed against her consciousness, delicate and sharp. Some were taut and vibrating, eager to be plucked. Others hung slack, nearly rotted through. She sensed, not in words, but in the ache behind her eyes, that this place, this liminal district the keeper had hinted at, was where such lines came to test themselves against form. Entire neighborhoods built of decisions that had nearly been made. Streets paved in postponement. To the right, a thicker knot of such lines, tangled and humming. To the left, a long, attenuated single strand, stretching away like a held breath. She turned left. Simplicity is also a trap.
I was not coming.
And yet you are here. You have stepped into the gap you left. That changes the tension of things.